Only two things in life are certain: death and taxes. Or rather, for our purposes, there are no two things quite as relatable to an audience as costs and the looming shadow of mortality. Across nations and cultures, an author can expect pretty much every reader to know what's up when talking about money. It's perhaps the most ubiquitous thing out there. Not everyone has experienced romance or loss or ambition or whatever other feeling or experience you might write about, but even children will have some idea about money. As far as world building is concerned, then there's really no other topic that provides such an easy in to expose the reader to something new. Whatever form the currency takes, whatever marks are stamped on it or denominations it's split into, everyone still knows that it's money. And from that, there you have a natural jumping off point into exposition. Why is that the currency? Who produces it? Why does it hold the value it does? Why is it made from the things it is? Plenty of real-life currencies are as, if not more interesting than many fictional ones. Because what is used as money and where it comes from says a lot about a society. And through just a little effort, an author can put a lot of world building into the name and nature of a coin. And while the ability to drop some exposition in a natural way is great in some ways, money is even better for showing instead of telling. As with anything, the amount of ways you can use money for world building are limitless, but there are a few areas that stand out. The currency's name, what it's made from, who mints it and who uses it. Right out of the gate, a currency's name and the names of its denominations, if it has any, can instantly set the scene. If you go into a story blind, knowing only that it's fantasy, some nondescript copper, silver and gold coins will put you into a high fantasy world. But if a character pulls out $1, you immediately jump to the modern day and the real world. Now you know it's urban fantasy. A shilling and a halfpence instead puts you in Victorian England, and now the story is probably steampunk. Likewise, you'll probably have a different first impression and expectations of a sci-fi setting if it uses credits, dollars, or bits. These are all existing names you can draw on for familiarity to set expectations, or, in the case of copper coins or credits, avoid them by going with something neutral. Alternatively, an author can come up with their own currency. The name doesn't need to be complicated. One of the currencies in the Game of Thrones series is the Gold Dragon, a very thematic name, which is split into silver stags and copper pennies. It mirrors the European influences Westeros draws from. A name can set the scene in very simple ways. Say if you make up the Kingdom of Bemor, you can call coins Bemoran crowns. Now say a character tries to pay in one currency and gets told the shop only takes Bemoran crowns. Several things have been established in one go. There is a nation called Bemor, which, having crowns, is likely a monarchy. The character has travelled far enough to have money from somewhere else. And the place they're in won't take that money. That last one is very important and brings us to our next point. Really, the next 2 points. Who mints the money and who uses it. In the modern day, it's taken for granted that every country has its own currency minted by its government, with notable exceptions like the euro. But historically, where the money comes from and who makes it has been a little more involved. Even in the modern day, it's still heinously complicated. For a lot of history, trade was done by swapping goods for goods, and even where money was involved, it was money that was inherently valuable. Hence the standard copper, silver and gold coins. Even if the country minting the coins collapses and your money loses any theoretical value, you still have an amount of precious metal. For the purposes of most people's world building, going into the details of fiat currency is way beyond the scope of what's needed. Instead, an author simply needs to consider that being able to issue currency that people want to use is a sign of stability and power, and that the less inherently valuable the material of the currency is, the more people are trusting in that stability and power. And that lets you express a few things. In the earlier example of the Bemoran crowns, the merchant does not trust in the value of whatever currency a character wants to pay with. If a trade is taking place in Bemor, then that merchant has faith in a local currency, or at least more faith than in a foreign one. If it is happening outside Bemor, then that tells us a lot. The local government is so weak that a merchant would rather have money from another country who he trusts to maintain its value. Without ever saying anything, an author can show hints about a political situation between two nations. Even readers who don't know much about currencies will understand that something must be wrong in Bemor if people don't want to use the kingdom's money. And they will understand that whatever other nation's money they will use, that nation has influence in Bemor. And so who is minting money shows us who has the authority and resources to do so, and who uses it shows us how far their authority and influence spreads. The final point on my list is what the money is made from. I've already talked about coins being made from precious metals, so they're inherently valuable, versus paper money, whose value comes from people agreeing it's worth something. But there's a lot more you can do with that first one. Silver and gold have been precious on Earth for a long time, but might not be elsewhere. In the Star Trek TV shows, a currency valued by multiple spacefaring governments is gold-pressed latinum. The valuable part here is the latinum, which is a liquid metal that's stored in gold. On its own, gold is considered more or less worthless in Star Trek. An author can use this in two ways, both to show what is valuable to a civilization and to set them apart from the norm. The latinum in Star Trek is less about latinum itself, a simple made-up metal, and more about showing how gold doesn't matter to them. On the other hand, in the game Caves of Cud, water is money because access to fresh water is so limited in that world that they prize it highly. As a necessity for life, it's the perfect example of a currency with inherent value. Somewhat inconvenient to carry around and ever depleting as you drink it, yet so vital that it's ideal for trade because no one will turn it down. The question of what people will accept and what they'll turn down is core to the entire idea of currency. You have things you want and things you can exchange for them. If you can barter them directly, then great, but everyone has different needs. You may need to find enough middlemen to trade what you have away and keep swapping until you get what you need. Or instead, you simply sell and buy things for money that's useful to everyone. In a lot of ways, it's an elegant solution. It's also an adaptable solution. Since a currency just needs to be something everyone will trade for, anything can become a currency. Unusual currencies often arise in situations where a consumable commodity can be traded. It's a common sight in crime dramas and police procedurals to see prisoners trading in cigarettes. And even though actually smoking them uses them up, inmates can still buy and sell for them because they're popular enough that pretty much everyone will accept them. Much like the water in Caves of Cud, the temporary nature of the currency doesn't diminish its value if people want it enough. Similar situations arise when people are kept isolated with few commodities. Workers will trade desirable or undesirable work shifts. In Star Trek Voyager, we see the ostensibly post-scarcity crew start to buy things with replicator energy and holodeck time when deprived of resources. In several sci-fi works, crew members trade time on the comms console to contact loved ones. Whatever thing everyone has and everyone wants can be spent as currency. I want to draw attention again to the temporary nature of all these currencies because it really drives home the core principle. Money is a stand-in for things people actually want. You might not be able to convince someone to trade their spare food for your water, but if you sell the water for money, you can now buy the food. In that way, a lot of currencies that may look silly at a glance now make sense. The post-apocalyptic Metro series uses bullets as money. Not ideal when you might be forced to use them up to defend yourself, but food and medical supplies might be more immediate concerns, so you'll be glad you have something people are almost guaranteed to accept. In Warhammer 40k, orcs use their own teeth as money. For a species all about fighting endlessly, being rewarded for knocking out someone's teeth makes perfect sense, and it's not like they're going to organize a government and issue currency. That's just not on their priority list. In this way, a huge amount of world building can be achieved through money. It tells you a huge amount about the state of society, what people value, and what their day-to-day lives look like. An author should consider the circumstances of their setting to see whether a part of the story might be told through this core part of the environment. There's also a lot to be looked at beyond whether the main characters are rich or poor, and the conclusion one arrives at may be that nothing more than copper, silver, and gold coins are needed. But it is always my firm belief that while you can choose to do anything in your writing, making it a conscious choice will improve the quality. They say money can't buy happiness. A hugely misused quote that, like many popular sayings, had a completely different meaning before. Money also can't buy things that you can't get to or can't afford. That isn't technically a quality of the currency itself, it's not like what's printed on it or its material, but it is very useful leverage for an author to tell a story. First, the question of logistics. You can't buy an item if you can't get to where it's being sold, or if you don't have your money on you. That means the practicalities of transporting money do play a role. Money made of very heavy materials is harder to transport, so if a civilization uses intricately inscribed stone pillars as money, these are probably only used to store wealth. They can be used for large transactions between very wealthy parties, where it would be inconvenient to exchange goods. Say a noble wants to sell an entire harvest's worth of food. Making the buyer bring enough goods to match presents a few challenges. Day-to-day purchases in that society, however, would require a different, more portable currency, or barter. That's a great world-building hook where an author can design the culture that made the stone pillars important enough to be used despite the inconvenience. Or perhaps the inconvenience is the point, and it's a show of wealth that they can afford to have such heavy money transported. Maybe it makes vast wealth harder to steal. There's endless possibilities. If a currency is particularly fragile or made from something perishable, it becomes a problem to move at large distances. Assuming there's no teleportation or rapid transport, that will create very isolated markets where cash is only used locally. Selling between markets would have to be done by trading goods for other goods, or again with a different currency. This is a very surface level glance at logistics, but for the enthusiast, it's still a good jumping off point into supply, demand, and how logistics can change value. Second, there's the question of buying things you can't afford, which is encompassed by the larger question of having enough money. That gets very interesting in a fantasy setting with magical money. In the browser game Fallen London, people do business with hell, and that includes trade in souls. Defaulting on a loan can be bad in any society, but it's an especially fraught idea when your soul is collateral. The same with several fictional worlds where people trade in lifespan, not something you want to run out of. Debts also tie back into the idea of what people value. In a modern day, debt tends to be all about money and assets that can be sold to recover that money. It used to be far more common for debts to be paid off with labor. There are also situations where debts between individuals are paid with favors and promises. In the John Wick movies, we see a debt represented in a large coin. That wasn't technically a currency, but the idea it represents can be expanded on. The idea of working to earn money is obvious to us, but hasn't always been the default. With its medieval leanings, fantasy likes to use apprenticeships, where you work and in return get food, lodging, and training. You'll earn money once you've learned the trade. In a post-scarcity society like those seen in many sci-fi works, owing someone a debt would not mean actually owing them money. But a coin as a representation of a promise or agreement is great symbology, especially if the cultural rules and expectations of that society mean they can be traded. In a world where different types of promises or debts are different denominations of currency, each individual coin will still have different value depending on the exact promise made and who the promise is from. How practical that would be is debatable, but it's important for showcasing just how far an author can take things if they're willing to get a little unusual with their money. There still remain myriad ways to use money that I haven't covered here. Company script, different economic systems, situations where people aren't allowed to use or even have money, and so much more. But a lot of that moves away from world-building money and into the society and context of that money. There's also all manner of specific examples of things an author could do that haven't found a place in this video. Often in world-building, when you get extremely specific, you find there's more and more to talk about. Grand sweeping concepts like planetary climates or political structures are so large and complicated that people start to simplify and generalize them by necessity. Meanwhile, a specific niche hobby like sewing or coinage can get people talking for hours about its intricacies. Money is a great topic for world builders in particular to get deeply into due to its prevalence and relatability. As I said before, everyone knows about money. But the core idea covered here, what do people find valuable and why, applies to almost all areas of world building. As long as an author remembers that money is essentially a stand-in for the things people actually want, it becomes clear that the best way to design a currency that adds depth and uniqueness to world building is to make one that is representative of a society's needs, desires, and values.